That North Korean nuclear test was the big story in Asia this week. News of the test first broke on social media. Users posted that there had been an artificial earthquake. Northeast Asia's mainstream news networks quickly followed. To give us some insight on the test and what might come next, we have David Straub, a former U.S. diplomat in Seoul. Dr. Straub is Associate Director of the Korean Studies Program at the Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center. Great to have you on LinkAsia, David.
My pleasure to be.
So the U.S., South Korea, and the UN have increasingly isolated and punished North Korea for its nuclear and missile program. It doesn't seem to be working or has not even deterred the North. Is it time to figure out a new policy?
It may be. For about 20 years now, the United States government's policy has been to try to seek a diplomatic deal with North Korea. That is, we would be willing to normalize diplomatic relations with North Korea, remove economic sanctions, and even give them some energy and other kinds of aid if they would just give up their nuclear and long-range missile programs. But as you say, so far at least, that hasn't worked. And with North Korea continuing its missile and nuclear test, I think the U.S. Is probably moving towards more of a containment policy, less of a focus on diplomacy and more of a focus on containing the threat from North Korea, making it harder for North Korea to develop its own nuclear programs and harder for it to proliferate to other countries.
Well, how would they go about containment? How do you make it harder for them to proliferate?
Yes, well, we have a number of programs internationally, including the Proliferation Security Initiative, which gets the international community working together to share intelligence about what countries like North Korea are doing, and in certain cases even stopping their vessels to inspect them and make sure they're not carrying contraband material. There are other ways. We can actually increase sanctions on North Korea, making it harder for them to conduct transactions of that sort, financial transactions. And another way of dealing with them is to increase missile defense. We can also work harder to try to get information into North Korea, to the people of North Korea, so that they know that what's been going on in the world and that their government is doing a bad thing in pursuing these very dangerous weapons.
You know, the only nation that seems to really have leverage is China. What could China do? And more importantly, what do you think it wants to do about the North?
Well, China is indeed the most influential foreign power in regard to North Korea. They provide by far the majority of the food aid and energy and other economic support that North Korea gets from the outside world. So if China wanted to, they could threaten to and even cut off a great deal of that aid. But China fears that if they do that, that the North Korean regime might collapse. And if the North Korean regime collapses, I think the Chinese leaders assume that South Korea would unify the peninsula. And South Korea is an ally of the United States, and I think the Chinese are very uncomfortable with the concept that somehow a unified Korea might be allied to the United States. So they step back from using the full force of their influence on North Korea.
This nuclear test, last month's missile test, got everyone worried. Do you think it's a tipping point? Are you worried? How far is North Korea from actually having a usable nuclear weapon?
I am indeed increasingly concerned about North Korea. When you have a third nuclear test, the experts say that means that you at least have the possibility of bringing the size of that device down to the size of a warhead and putting it then on a missile. But, you know, I'm less concerned about that, right now at least, than I am about the possibility that the North Koreans, having nuclear devices, will feel sort of invulnerable and feel that they can attack South Korea as they've done in the past, but even more often and more aggressively. And at some point, South Korea could respond. In 50, 60 years, South Korea has never responded to these violent North Korean attacks because they didn't want to risk war. But if these continue and get worse, then at some point the South Koreans could very well respond. And that would risk war, outright war on the Korean Peninsula, possibly in the worst case involving the United States and China.
Well, definitely an ongoing tense situation. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
David Straub is a Korea expert at Stanford University's Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center.
Now on U.S. airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.